Uh-oh, Popeye better keep his eyes on olive oil. Here's your look at the Boss Fight Studio Popeye Classics Bluto. Everyone's favorite Sailor Man and his crew are finally coming to highly articulated figure form. Drawing inspiration from the classic Sagar comic strips, these figures are sure to delight all Popeye fans. These 1/12 scale figures stand between 4 to 6 inches, depending on the character. Bluto is ready for fist-pounding action. This gigantic figure comes with a removable hat and alternate hands for all your play and display needs. Before somebody starts rolling up their sleeves to fight a certain Sailor Man, I'd like to first thank the folks over at Boss Fight Studio that did provide this sample of the Popeye Classics Bluto that we could have a look at this review. I'm going to also bring in the other Popeye figures we've looked at so far, that being Popeye, that being also Olive Oil. Of course, we're going to be doing that in a moment. Also, obviously, I'm going to be measuring off the figure. Bluto, in this case, stands 5.5 inches in height, or the figure's 14 centimeters tall. Speaking of those other two figures, here's what Bluto looks like with both Popeye the Sailor Man and, of course, his girl Olive Oil. Olive Oil will be a little bit taller, but even still, she only goes to about the ear of Bluto. Bluto, I've also got, in this case, his knees slightly bent. As the figure has a little bit of a wobbling issue, we're going to talk more about that in a moment. Though, to beeline it back to Popeye, one other correction I did also want to make in the review that I did have a look at him. I did have his hat sitting really low. Now, that's an option you can also do as well. But did you also know that there's a built-in magnet? It's embedded into the plastic itself. So when it actually is the time to actually stick it onto Popeye's head, he does actually survive tipping the head upside down, providing you got the magnet lined up in place. But as it should have been the case, as always is the case, Bluto is going to be the biggest of the three figures, at least of the figures we looked at so far. While we are on the topic of hats, Bluto, of course, comes included with his own. Like Popeye, it's sort of strange, I find, to see Bluto without one, but luckily the figure comes included with it. It's molded nicely here in very nice blue plastic, and you can see there's a banding of white on the back. The paint handled pretty good. I mean, there's a few little areas where it bleeds a little bit onto the blue, but overall the hat does look good. I don't know if it has necessarily a built-in magnet. I was kind of looking at this and assuming it probably did, something similar to what we got with already Popeye. But when you take, for example, Bluto's head, and only strange to see him without actually the hat on top of his head, when you do put it on his head, it sort of feels like it holds on to something. But then the moment you tilt the figure forward, it doesn't seem to stay on in place as well as Popeye's hat did before. At least it does sit on his head better than maybe Popeye. Maybe he doesn't even necessarily need to use a magnet. But either way, it does sit nicely on his head. And it does finish the look of what I always picture Bluto to have. It always seems so strange to me to see Bluto without the hat at all. Even though without the hat, the head is nicely sculpted. You can see as well the nice use of black paint for not only his hair, but also the beard down below. The beard being as black as it is does showcase then even more the whiter teeth that he has. He can't be smiling because he's happy. He's got to be smiling because he's plotting something sinister. He does have, again, some nice panel lining on the side of his face, right by his eyes. Where all the squints would start to develop wrinkles is nicely where they painted it on the figure's head sculpt. The plastic choice that they've used for the color is also quite good as well. And again, like just to add the hat, boy, does that ever nicely finish the look of Bluto. I'm going to probably leave the hat off for right now, simply just because, again, I'm going to be moving the figure around. I just don't want the hat to fall and be misplaced anywhere. The figure's build is big and bulky, as it certainly should be the case when it comes to Bluto. He has primarily a black shirt with, of course, the yellow buttons that are painted nicely here in the front. And then he does have a little bit of a different color with the sleeves, as the sleeves are sort of more of a brownish beige. There's, of course, a hinge joint there in the elbow, all of which we will talk about more in a moment. And, of course, down below here, he's got himself a blue belt, a yellow buckle that matches the coloring of the buttons that he has on his shirt, and sort of a mustard-colored yellow pants with brown shoes below. The thing I had already mentioned at the beginning of this review is technically you can straighten out Bluto's legs. The thing about it, though, is it does off-kilter the figure's balance. In fact, in order then to get him to stand properly, I have to kind of lean the figure just a little bit further forward. He does technically have ankle rocking, although I found with this figure, especially this ankle right here, even if you angle the feet inward, I find he still has, see, again, like you kind of have to have him leaning and crunched a little bit further forward. Again, we'll talk more about the articulation more in a moment. The figure also does come included with a couple of other accessories not already mentioned with the hat. He comes with just regular relaxed hands. Very pillowy sort of hands that Bluto has. Of course, he already has the gripping hands, but he doesn't really grip anything. And then, of course, if you did want to get down to fighting Popeye, he probably will want to curl in those fingers and make himself some fists. But luckily, the folks over at Boss Fight Studio have already made fists for Bluto, so he's ready for some punching action. To change the hands out, it's simple to do. You simply just hold on to the forearms and just easily, very easily pop those off, and then just replace them with the corresponding hands that you want to use. Just wiggle them back into the provided holes, and then Bluto again is ready for sucker punching Popeye. Suppose the other hand also, on the other hand, you could take yourself, say, for example, Olive Oyl, and you can have like Olive Oyl sort of strung over his shoulder like he's carrying her away. Back in the day, that was the kind of thing that was acceptable. Maybe not as much now. Now, Olive Oyl would certainly hand it to Bluto, but back in the day, it was all about kidnapping Olive Oyl. For the figure's articulation, let's run through that right now. Bluto's head is on a ball joint, and it works quite well, in fact. The head does look down, it looks up, and of course, it can also rock back and forth as well. It maybe doesn't have as much the mileage as maybe both Popeye and Olive Oyl that we looked at before, but at least he does have some decent head articulation. The shoulders work a lot better, honestly. There's a hinge joint that allows the arms to give a very large bear hug to Popeye. You can take those same arms and rotate them all the way around, and that's obviously the case on both the sides as well. Also with his forearms, he has not only just a hinge joint in his elbow, and it's only a single hinge, but that's fine. But that hinge joint also allows the forearm to rotate back and forth too. And with only being a peg that plugs in place, you can also rotate the hand all the way around. The figure has, I'm assuming to be a ball joint. Just to look at the figure actually, there's a waist swivel right here. But even just to rock it back and forth, there seems like there's a little bit of options available. So there's probably a ball joint attaching the top of his torso to the rest of his body. Speaking of the rest of his body, Bluto does have ball joints that's attached to the thighs and allows the legs to obviously move forward and move back and out as well. He has also only a single hinge in the lower knee that does allow the lower leg to rotate back and forth. And if you can hopefully see it, he does have a ball joint that attaches the foot portion to, of course, the rest of the pants. And again, that allows the legs, the feet, to move back and forth and up and down. It doesn't move it up and down as much, but it certainly does give you that very nice ankle rock. The figure does have pegals on the undersides of his feet, although the figures don't necessarily come included with display stands. It is a nice looking Bluto, though. Let's go ahead and finish off the look by adding on his hat. Again, like while I put on the hat, I feel like there's something that's pulling the hat further forward on his face, with, again, leading me to believe that there is a magnet probably embedded somewhere in there, but it just doesn't work to the strength I've noticed here with Popeye. And speaking again of Popeye, we can bring in Popeye that we've already had a look at, and bring in, of course, Olive Oyl that we've already had a look at also as well. I gotta say, I'm loving this line so much. Some of you guys also had asked, didn't know that Popeye had hair. Well, in the comics, I believe he also had hair. It was more in the cartoon that they made him bald. Of course, this line is more heavily influenced by the original Sagar comics, and that's one of the reasons why Popeye may have had hair where he never had hair before. But again, overall, I really like the look of these figures. The quality of the plastic is something I know I probably have mentioned it before when we looked at Boss Fight Studios stuff consistently across the board with all the stuff that they're producing, whether it be the Popeye stuff or whether it even be Strawberry Shortcake. The plastic that they're using is really good. It's very user-friendly. While I am moving things around on the figure, the quality feels good on the plastic where the joints don't feel like they're necessarily going to break. And let's just face facts. The figures look fantastic on the shelf if you're lucky enough to pick any for yourself. While for the record, I don't condone the idea of kidnapping a woman, Bluto was all about that back in the day. Maybe not as socially acceptable about the idea of it doing now. Bluto was always in these episodes stealing poor Olive Oyl, and then Popeye had to pursue him, eventually freeing her at the end. Of course, somewhere in the middle of that, he'd have to squeeze a tin of spinach, and it would make that sort of rainbow shape before it found its way into his mouth, bulge in his biceps, and of course Popeye would beat down Bluto to save Olive Oyl for the day, at least until next time Bluto decided to steal her again. The figure looks fantastic, and though I may probably not display him with Olive Oyl up on his shoulder, that's demeaning, of course, to Olive Oyl. I do like the idea that if you wanted to, you could possibly do that also as well for your display shelf. Bluto, like Popeye we looked at before, and Olive Oyl has some really good vibrant colors going for him. The darker color, for example, of his shirt mirrored nicely as well with the custard, sort of mustard yellow that they've given for his pants. And the figure has some decent articulation. Maybe as not as much mileage can be made for as much as, say, say the Popeye the Sailor Man, but Bluto still has all the articulation where it counts. You do, though, have to lean the figure just a little bit further forward, just because the weight of the figure, he is feeling a little back heavy just because he's got such a large torso. There's a lot of mass happening here with Bluto, so you may want to just kind of compensate that a little bit with the way that you've angled the figure's feet. What do you guys think of Bluto? Let me know down below in the comments section. And again, a big thank you to the folks over at Boss Fight Studio that did provide this sample of the new Popeye Classics Bluto that we could have a look at this review. If you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly do want to stick around for more, please and thank you. By the way, FYI, we are going to be looking at some more Popeye Classics stuff. So if so far if you guys have been enjoying all the figure reviews that we've been seeing so far, just know that there's going to be more coming your way. To make sure that you're not missing out on anything, first, if you enjoyed this video, I throw it a like. But if you guys are loving the content, you don't want to miss out, hit that subscribe button down below, and as well turn on the bell notification. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.